Justice Amy Coney Barrett is now a U.S. Supreme Court justice. The left's response is similar to the temper tantrums that it likes to throw when it can't get its way. It seems their motto is that if you can't win with the current system, well, hey, then let's just tear it down and build something that is compatible with democracy. We've seen this come from those on the hard left this summer over alleged racism, as well as those desperate to get Trump out of office. However, since the death of Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the focus has shifted over to the Supreme Court. We'll look at what is supposedly a bipartisan answer of adding term limits to the Supreme Court in this episode of Analysis Behind the News, where we provide the perspective that you can use to restore American liberty and independence. The debate of term limits goes back to the founding of our country. The Articles of Confederation, the first Constitution, if you will, which guided the national government for the first 4 years of America's founding, actually included term limits. Delegates to the Continental Congress could only serve 3 out of every 6 years. When the delegates came together for the Constitutional Convention of 1787, both sides of the issue were passionately debated. In the end, though, the founders rejected term limits. The idea of term limits is now a front and center topic, especially with the dissatisfaction of seating U.S. Supreme Court Justice Amy Coney Barrett. According to The Hill, liberals have warned that Barrett's expected confirmation Monday will cement a 6-3 conservative majority. First of all, it is rather disheartening that the Supreme Court has devolved into partisan politics. Obeying and applying the Constitution should be a rather straightforward process without any hint of partisan politics. While The Hill would like to have us believe that conservatives would have that much dominion on the court, the question must be asked, what should a conservative majority look like? After all, haven't so-called conservatives more or less controlled the court for quite some time? Would a conservative majority interpret the mandate of purchasing a health care plan as a tax, allowing the unconstitutional Obamacare law to stand? Would a conservative majority interpret the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed by allowing infringement? The court itself must realize its role as explained in Article 3 of the Constitution. However, just as important is Congress following its role in monitoring the Supreme Court. Article 3, Section 2 includes a clause delegating power to Congress to limit the appellate jurisdiction of the court. With a majority in Congress, Roe v. Wade could be overturned. Yet, we should also recognize that the very first sentence in Article 1 of the Constitution is, all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States. If Congress has all legislative powers, then how many are left over for the Supreme Court to legislate from the bench? None, right? Then why do we have to have the Supreme Court overturn Roe v. Wade? Once again, it's due to Congress not following the Constitution. They should be using their constitutional checks and balances to ensure constitutional adherence by the court as a whole and for each justice individually. Article 3, Section 1 lists that judges shall hold their offices during good behavior. In a previous video, we covered what constituted good behavior in Federalist Paper number 78 as written by Alexander Hamilton. We concluded that if a justice cannot deliver a steady, upright, and impartial administration of the laws, or if the justice injures the political rights of the Constitution, then Congress must exercise their power to impeach. No term limits are necessary. If the federal government would just obey the Constitution, then there would be zero need for any other solutions. And speaking of other solutions, former VP Joe Biden finally answered the question of whether or not he would pack the Supreme Court. Well, he kind of answered it. In an interview with 60 Minutes, he was asked by Norah O'Donnell, if elected, would you move to add more justices to the Supreme Court? Mr. Biden said, if elected, what I will do is I will put together a national bipartisan commission of scholars, constitutional scholars, Democrats, Republicans, liberal, conservative, and I will ask them to, over a period of 180 days, to come back to me with recommendations as to how to reform the court system because it's getting out of whack. Well, it doesn't take very many scholars to point to the Constitution and tell you to follow it, as the Constitution contains many of the solutions to today's governmental problems. Yet, according to The Hill, 30 so-called scholars have endorsed term limits for the Supreme Court. Now, granted, the Constitution is quiet over the number that is needed, leaving that final decision to the Senate to confirm or not confirm nominees the president puts forth. U.S. history has shown us that packing the court is done to overcome hurdles to political agendas. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt was probably the most blatant example, as the Supreme Court ruled against many of his New Deal bills over and over again. His proposed answer was to pack the courts, up to 15 justices, but it didn't happen. Instead, 2 of the justices flipped and actually began to support his legislation. However, in his 12-year term, FDR eventually nominated and the Senate confirmed replacements for all 9 justices due to retirements and deaths. Can you imagine what would have happened if that was the case today? In response to the confirmation of Supreme Court Justice Barrett, Representatives Ilhan Omar, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and Rashida Tlaib tweeted their support for packing, or what they called expanding the court. The 4th Squad member, Iona Presley, has said 3 days prior that packing the court was definitely on the table in a Joe Biden administration. According to Fox News, Biden suggested just before the Senate vote of rotating justices between courts instead of spending their entire tenure on the Supreme Court. He failed to provide any constitutional justification for this, instead opting to say there is some literature among Constitution scholars about the possibility. Nonetheless, term limits for elected officials are still popular with some conservatives, even though the limits are unnecessary, as frequent elections should act as their own term limits, with an educated electorate throwing out those who would not adhere to the Constitution. Which brings us to next week's election. Have you made up your mind who to vote for depending upon the voting record of the candidate? Or are you happy to just vote a straight party ticket without checking voting records? Or perhaps you won't even vote at all. Well, to help you learn the voting record of at least your congressman, The New American has published a scorecard called the Freedom Index since the 1970s. It rates congressmen according to their adherence to the Constitution. You can look up individual members or download the most recent installment in a PDF to show others how these congressmen are doing. Direct links are in the video description, and this is, again, one of the many tools that we offer to help inform concerned Americans about the system of government that our founders gave us and the active role they expected us to take in order to safeguard liberty, freedom, and independence. So I got to ask, who do you know that cares about freedom and independence? Because, folks, it's time to act. The survival of our very republic hinges on what you do or don't do. I'm Bill Hunt for the John Birch Society. Until next time, stay informed, stay active, and stay safe, Patriots.